So let's get this started, shall we? Good day. It is 6 in the evening in Sydney and Melbourne, and though distance separates us, we at Australian Young Christian Workers Movement welcome you all to this year's May Day initiative, the Young Workers Conference. It is a time for us to come together to combat wage theft and worker exploitation, so you can equip yourself with the knowledge to conquer work disputes. Our founder, Cardinal Joseph Cardine, said that the young worker is worth more than all the gold in the world. And we're taking the sentiment and are excited to host for you this year's Young Workers Conference. Now, to start our festivities, we'll be partaking in an acknowledgement of country and a prayer. And for those of us not of the Christian faith, please feel free to direct this prayer to your spiritual guide or to use this as a moment of reflection. Now, let us acknowledge the countries where we are meeting from. As we enter this sacred space, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all stand. Their footsteps were here, long before our shoe prints. Their handprints were here centuries before our buildings rose. Their hearts loved and broke in this country, generations before our violence, settlements, and sorrows. Their cultural authority and traditions were established long before our communities of relationships and leaders came to be. We call upon their spirit ancestors and our own ancestors who have gone to God to be with us as we share, learn, and celebrate together. May we walk gently on this land. We also welcome Christ, who comes to us as the visitor, the stranger, the young worker, the refugee, the asylum seeker, the migrant, and those still offshore, awaiting our welcome onshore. Lord Jesus, please fill us with the spirit of your love and help us to serve you. In solidarity with our student and worker brothers and sisters, we offer you all our work, study, hopes, struggles, joys, and sorrows. Help us to see the world as you do, to judge with your heart, and to act with strength and courage as we challenge what is wrong. May those who have suffered for what is right and all who have died share in the happiness of your kingdom forever. Amen. Now, before we begin today's conference, we'd like to watch a short video titled Overworked and Underpaid. So just bear with us a moment as we put that on the screen. Just a moment longer and that should come up soon. Alrighty, it seems like we are having some technical difficulties, so we might skip the video for now. If we're able to, we might come back to it at the end. So again, welcome to the Young Workers Conference, a celebration of International Labour Day, or May Day, by the Australian Young Christian Workers Movement. Tonight, we welcome 4 amazing panellists who work in and have lived the workers' struggle. We'll put your work in this context, discuss what your rights are as a young worker, and talk about what to do in a sticky situation, as well as discussing unions, why they're important and why we should join them, if that's suited to you. We'll then give you the opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A portion of the night at the end of the conference. Now, to start the ball rolling, let us please welcome our first speaker. Our first speaker is Wallace Frank, who is the Industrial Officer at the Migrant Workers Centre. In his role, Wallace provides assistance on workplace rights to migrant workers, refugees, and asylum seekers. Coming from a migrant Chinese Australian family and with a background in law, he's very passionate about improving and enforcing migrant workers' employment rights. Now, he will be speaking about Know Your Rights. So let us please welcome Wallace.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm just going to share some slides. So hopefully this works. Okay, can everyone see the slide, Your Rights at Work? Very good. Excellent. All right, well, as it no doubt says, this presentation is about your basic rights at work. It's going to be a bit of a crash course. So let's see how quickly we can get through as much information as possible. I just want to also acknowledge the lands on which the Migrant Workers Centre stands at Victorian Trades Hall, and that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional owners of that land. We pay our respects to elders past and present, acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Today, there are three main things that I'll be talking about. Firstly, the types of jobs. Secondly, basic rights at work. And thirdly, how to get help when you have a bit of trouble. So straight to the different types of jobs. Of course, there are many. Here are three of the most common. First, on the left is a permanent job, and that can be full-time or a part-time job. But the basic feature of that is that you have a guarantee of regular hours that you're going to work every week. So if you're full-time, that means you're generally, the boss might say that you're going to work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and that'll happen every week until either you quit or the boss says you no longer have a job. So if you are under that sort of arrangement, permanent full-time, permanent part-time, then you would have more rights and protections than other workers. Secondly, in the middle there, we've got a casual. And a casual, by contrast, means that you don't have such a guarantee of regular hours or any hours, in fact. And there's no guarantee that that job is going to continue indefinitely. So because there is no security about that, then the law says you have to be paid 25% more compared to a permanent worker doing the same job. So permanent, you know what you're doing every week, well, mostly. But with a casual, you're kind of waiting for the boss to let you know how many hours of work there's going to be that week, or if you have any work at all. And thirdly, on the right, we have the contractor. A contractor, essentially, instead of working for someone, the idea is that you work for yourself. And you, if you will, open your own business and you provide a service to someone who is paying for that service. But because you're not working for anyone, that means that you have almost no rights or protections that employees would have under Australian law. So often many people are not sure whether they're employees or whether their boss is saying that they're a contractor. One surefire way to know is if your boss is asking you to give them an ABN. So you can see that at the bottom right there. And what is an ABN? An ABN is an Australian business number. It's the number you receive when you register your business with the government. So that's a basic overview there. Now to the stuff I'm sure everyone cares about. The minimum wage. This year, 2021 to 2022, the minimum wage is $20.33 per hour. However, you might remember that I said for casuals, you have to be paid 25% more. And so the minimum wage at the moment for casuals is $25.41. Now, a couple of things. Firstly, it's nearly July, and usually every July there is a new minimum wage, and generally speaking, it's going to be higher. So stay tuned for that one. Second, these are the absolute minimum wages around Australia, with some exceptions, but generally speaking, these are the absolute minimum wages. Many people have jobs where the minimum is actually a bit higher, depending on the type of job that they are doing. That's because there are some rules called awards. And so this is the absolute minimum, but you should be aware that if you want to find out what is the minimum for your job, that's a question that you can come to us and ask. Overtime. Overtime, if you work more than 38 hours in 1 week, generally speaking, then you have to be paid extra for the extra hours that you have worked. So basically, if you work 40 hours in 1 week, then the last 2 hours, you have to be paid at a higher rate than you would normally be paid. Now, that also applies if you work too many hours in 1 day. How many will depend on your job, but as a rule of thumb, if it's more than 12, there's not really any job where that wouldn't be overtime. So if either of those apply, then the extra hours that you're doing need to be paid extra, and that is called overtime. So how much more? Again, I can't give you a definitive answer. It will depend on your job, and if you're unsure, we can always look up your job and provide you with an answer. Penalty rates. It's a penalty for the boss, not for you. Now, if you work on a weekend, on a Saturday or Sunday, generally speaking, you would need to be paid extra. If you work early in the morning or late at night, same thing, you would need to be paid extra. Again, how much depends on the type of job that you have. And again, same thing, same story on a public holiday. There are 13 public holidays in Victoria. It might be somewhat different, more or less the same in most states, but you would need to be paid more on a public holiday. So you also usually cannot be directed. You can't be forced to work normally on a public holiday, but that can depend on the circumstances. Superannuation. So at the moment, how this works is there's your pay, and then your employer has to work out what 10% of that pay is, and that extra 10% goes into superannuation. What's the point of superannuation? That's money that's put away in a separate account, invested in a fund, and that money you can then use once you have retired. So that account is something that belongs to you. It must be contributed to, and you use that after you retire. I think it's very important with superannuation because a lot of people forget to check this entitlement, or don't know how or where to check it. I think every time you start a new job, it's very important to make sure that you have provided superannuation details to your employer, or you have checked that your employer is going to create a superannuation account for you. At the moment, it's 10%, but it's actually projected to get even higher in the next couple of years as well. Payslips. I'm going over time. Payslips. So every single worker, employee must be given a payslip within 24 hours of being paid. So get transferred your bank account, cash, doesn't matter what it is, within 24 hours, the employer must give you a payslip. It is not optional. It's not upon request. They've just got to give it to you by email, in person, or however it is. That payslip needs to have a few very important details. It needs to have your name, the employer's legal name, their ABN, which is their, as I said, Australian business number, how much you've been paid, how many hours you've worked, and superannuation that has been contributed to your account. So in summary, those are some of the most important things that payslips absolutely must have. It's always very important to hold on to your payslips and not lose them, or just accidentally delete them from your emails, because later on you might find out there's an issue with your pay, and this is how you can demonstrate that there was a problem. Sick leave. So now these are some of the things that are different between full-time, part-time workers and casual workers, but let's go through those. If you are full-time, every year you get 10 days of personal leave, which can often be used if you're sick. And of course, if you are part-time, you get a portion of that, depending on how many hours you work. If you're casual, you don't get paid sick leave. So what is this for? You get to stay home if you are sick, or if you are looking after a sick family member, and you still get paid. And what does family member include? At the moment, it's mother, father, children, grandfather, grandmother, or someone else who lives in your house. So just remember, 10 days full-time, a bit less if you're part-time, nothing if you're a casual, but even if you are a casual, you do have a right to stay home if you are sick. It's just that you will not be paid. Annual leave. For permanent employees, every year you get 4 weeks of annual leave. So for full-time, that means the equivalent of 20 days, essentially. And what do you get to do with it? You get to be away from work and still get paid. And you can do whatever you want during those days. For example, take a holiday. That's pretty nice. So now if you are casual, you do not get annual leave, but you could still request some time off, it just won't be paid. Now, some of the things about annual leave, generally speaking, depending on if the award rules say so, or if it's in your contract, most people on annual leave, when taking annual leave, get paid 17.5% more than normal, and this is called annual leave loading. Another feature of annual leave is that if you don't use it, it will carry over to the following year. So if let's say I work for 4 years and I never take a holiday, then I have 4 times 4, 16 weeks of annual leave, which is a good deal. And then let's say, thirdly, let's say I quit after 4 years having never taken any annual leave, then that 16 weeks of pay actually needs to be paid to me. So unused annual leave, when someone quits, that unused leave must be paid as one big sum to any employee who is leaving. So make sure you get that. Just some quick things on other related matters. Health and safety. All workers have the right to a safe workplace. Can't get through it all, but in summary, you have the right to say no to work that is unsafe. And you also have the right to point out that something in the workplace isn't safe. And it is the employer's responsibility to investigate and fix up any issues that have been, well, any issues at all, really. But of course, when you've identified them, they really should be trying to fix them as well. Now, when we say safety, it isn't just physical safety. Mental health is also important. So things like bullying are a health and safety issue. Work cover. If you are injured at work, though, despite all that safety, you do get insurance to cover some of those costs. And so here you can see a list of what it covers. Pay while you can't work, it's often called weekly payments. Secondly, medical costs of treatment. And thirdly, compensation for some serious long-term, permanent, for example, injuries. And what's covered, both physical and mental injuries are covered by work cover. The only thing I'll note about work cover is as soon as you are injured, as soon as there's an incident at work, you've fallen over or anything's happened, I would strongly recommend that you have reported in writing to your employer straight away, because if you do need to claim some insurance, you later find out how serious the injury is. It's very important to be able to demonstrate that the injury happened at work, because work cover only covers injuries at work. All right. What happens if you lose your job? Of course, you should not lose your job in a way that is unfair. If that happens, you could be able to claim compensation or even get your job back. And that's by making a claim to a government body called the Fair Work Commission. However, there are some ways your job can end which are reasonable. Of course, you can resign. If you do something that's seriously wrong, like hitting your boss in the face, then look, you're probably going to lose your job. Or the employer genuinely no longer needs anyone to do your job for some sort of business reason, for instance, and that's called a redundancy. And if that happens, you should also get some compensation in most cases. But if you do think the way you've lost your job is unfair, you do need to make sure that you get some advice very quickly, because if you're going to challenge it in the Fair Work Commission, you only have 21 days from your last day you worked to file that claim. So as soon as something fishy happens when you lose your job, get some advice straight away from us or from a lawyer or from a union, preferably a union, to be honest. Now, I won't have time to talk very in depth about discrimination, but let's just say that if you do feel that there has been some discrimination based on one of the attributes that is listed on this slide, it's also very important to get some advice, preferably from a union, but if not, a lawyer or from us. And also to note, it is against the law to take action against a worker who's just using their rights. For example, asking about, there's a problem with my pay, for instance. That would be something you can't retaliate against the worker for. All right, I am nearly out of time, but I do want to talk about unions. So what is a union? A union is a group of workers who have joined together to make their jobs better and safer. So, you know, when you are a collective, when you have joined together, it is of course much easier to get better paying conditions and to you know, join together to raise safety issues and make sure everyone's job is safe. It's important to note that it is everyone's right to participate in a union, and if you're not sure what industry, what union it might be, there's a way to find out. You can go to that website, australianunionstyle.au, and often they can help you with which union to join. And finally, how to get help. So if you are a member of a union, of course, union is always your friend, your first port of call. But for especially migrant workers, refugees, asylum seekers, anyone on a temporary visa, we may be able to help with that workplace issue as well in a very general way. Of course, we speak many different languages and we can provide support in virtually any language. It's always free and confidential, and you can make an appointment on our website, migrantworkers.org.au/get_help. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. So that's a whirlwind tour. Of course, there's lots of nuance, lots of grey areas. I could get into more detail, but hopefully that provides some really basic overview of what it's like to be working in Australia. But of course, if people want detail on particular things, I'm sure we'll have questions further in this session. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Wallace. And yes, you're right. We've actually already got a couple questions that we'll go through at the end of the session. So yeah, thank you for all that information. It's so very important that working persons are aware of, you know, employment classifications, minimum working wage, leave and pay entitlements, so that with that knowledge they can actually ensure that they're always given what they're entitled to working in Australia. So with that, we'll move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Josh Callerman, who is the Secretary of the Retail and Fast Food Workers Union, which was established in 2016. Before this, Josh worked in unions for 15 years after leaving the Young Christian Workers movement as a national leader and a Melbourne worker. Josh's workplace action commenced as a casual worker at Woolworths and various service stations in the 1990s, and his participation in the YCW International Action Meeting in Spain in 2001 on insecure work, and was actively involved in young Christian students and young Christian workers movements from 1991 to 2003. Now he'll be looking into why unions exist, what are the benefits of joining the union movement, and without further ado, thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for having me along tonight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why unions exist and I guess the things that workers achieve through unions, or the benefits of being in a union, in other words. Unions have existed for very many years, and they existed in different forms hundreds of years ago, often in the forms of guilds or in forms of peasant movements. In the 1830s, in the United Kingdom, there was a group of workers, agricultural workers, farm workers, who came together and swore an oath to each other to form one of the first unions, and these were called the Tolpuddle Martyrs. They were called Tolpuddle Martyrs because they were found out by the landowners, by the elite, by what we now call bosses, and they were charged with swearing a secret oath that was against the interests of the lords, and those workers were found guilty, and they were transported to Australia to serve their punishment for engaging in that daring crime of forming a union. Workers have been coming together to collectively demand things before that, and certainly since that. And peasants do that in many parts of the world to this day. They did it hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but now throughout various parts of the world, there are peasant movements where workers that are fighting to be able to have access to land, to farm it, to live on it, and to raise their families. And workers do it in industrialised countries. Workers do this to try and collectively secure a better outcome against the power of those who would dictate when they get paid, what they get paid, and the circumstances in which they work. And so a union is when a group of workers come together to fight collectively for a better outcome. And we're talking about real power here. We often think about ourselves as individuals in the workplace, but in our workplaces, there is real power being exercised by the employer. So for example, when I worked at Woolworths back in my YCW days in 93, 4 and 5 and 96, I was working in the meat room. And when it came to a Saturday afternoon, back in the days when the shop closed at 5 p.m. on a Saturday, we would have to clean the meat cabinets and stock the meat cabinets. And at 6 p.m, we were all marched out to the finger scanner, scanned off, and then marched back to work and to keep working. And this was because we were engaged as casual workers. We had no power. We didn't know what to do about that. Our boss just required us to do that. And when I worked at Mobile, and I was sacked for being a member of YCW, for being a member of an organisation that would help workers engage in worker rights, and I was sacked after working there for a year. Again, there was no real recourse other than an unfair dismissal case in which I secured 6 months' wages, but I didn't get my job back. And so again, the power of the employer over all of us workers was very strong. When I was working at other service stations and I made a work cover claim in one and I promptly got sacked, or in one where I asked to be paid for the last 15 minutes of work, something that lots and lots of workers do who are not being paid to turn up to work and open up the shop, or at the end of their shift, they have to close up. I asked to be paid for those 15 minutes and I promptly got no shifts for 5 weeks. 5 weeks without being able to afford food, without being able to put petrol in the car, until I went and begged for my job back from that employer. All of these were made possible because casual work is insidious, and casual workers too often are not organised in unions to fight for these things and to overcome them. Many countries around the world ban casual employment. It's not really understood in Australia, but there are many countries that ban casual employment or ban fixed-term employment and require fundamental protections in the workplace so that workers can get organised. When workers organise in their unions, they stop exploitation. They secure fair wages. They have safer workplaces. And this isn't just the rhetoric of a union official. These are known through research, through academic research. The statutory authorities like WorkSafe in Victoria and the others, they know that organised workplaces are safer workplaces, and they help workers secure dignity at work. Dignity at work isn't given through benevolent bosses. We can all at times have a good boss who treats us well and gives us fair conditions, but there are far, far more bosses out there that are trying to make a profit, including massive companies. Workers in the past have died to secure the rights and the conditions that we have today. Workers died to get the weekend. Workers died to get kids out of coal mines. Workers have fought and died on Labor's battlefield for hundreds of years. And that's why it's an essential part of the YCW prayer, is because it is so important that we recognise the history of who has gone before. And they were workers organised in good unions. Good unions are led by members. Good unions fight for their members. They're inclusive of workers of colour, of women, of young workers, of queer workers, and of disabled and neurodiverse workers. Good unions will include all of those workers in what they do. They build community of peers, and they secure that would otherwise be denied. And this is what we do every day, but there are lots of great unions in Australia and around the world that do this every day. I wanted to try and play a video. I'm not quite sure if it's going to, if the sound's going to work, but I'll give it a quick attempt. And perhaps someone can let me know if the sound isn't working.
The sound isn't working, but we can watch the video, Josh.
I'm sorry, Steve, did you say the sound isn't working?
Sorry, the sound isn't working.
Okay, well, I'll stop that share then. It was a great little video of some workers at a bookshop in Sydney called Better Read Than Dead, that last year took the first collective action in retail and fast food in 50 years. And I'll share the link in the during the question time after my colleagues and comrades have finished. I'll share the link in the chat. And so this group of workers took direct industrial action in their workplace to get a better deal, to get better wages and better conditions, and to get converted to ongoing employment from casual employment. But we raise issues like this every day. And some of the big note ones that we've done is, as a union, we have gotten rid of a whole range of old rotten agreements that applied at places like Coles and Woolworths and Kmart and Officeworks and McDonald's and KFC. Getting rid of those old agreements which cut conditions have returned about $1 billion a year to many young workers. But right now, employers also come after a whole range of other conditions. So we've run a big case because Big W has stripped out the safety matting from the assisted checkout areas in stores. We had a case just a couple of years ago where McDonald's coerced children over access to toilets and water in their workplace, threatened them with action if they were to seek their entitlement to rest breaks. These are cases which aren't 100 or 200 years ago, or even 50 or 10 years ago. This is literally just last year or the year before, when workers finally secured the right to go to the toilet and have water during work time. Last year and the year before, we ran a great campaign at JB Hi-Fi, where we were seeking to end gender discrimination and sexual harassment. And in retaliation, JB Hi-Fi banned RAFWU t-shirts and hoodies in their workplace. That's an issue we've had to take to court. In the last few weeks, we've had Woolworths allege in court cases that workers are paranoid about COVID, and that all workers, there should be an expectation all workers will catch COVID. These are the types of issues that our members deal with every day, and we know that many of those participating today will be dealing with in their own workplaces. At the start of the COVID pandemic, we had Coles try well, Coles did roll out hand sanitizer, which was ineffective against COVID. And so we had to run a big campaign to get alcohol-based hand sanitizer into stores. This stuff not everyone hears about, not everyone knows about, but these are the types of actions that unions like RAFWU are dealing with every day. The reality is that big business and the main political parties are just not on the side of workers. And the best way to show that to young workers is in junior rates. Junior rates were supposed to be abolished in 2001, but the Labor Party and the Liberal Party and the National Party teamed together and kept them and made them, they were supposed to sunset and made them law. For now, over 20 years, young workers paid less simply because they are young. And we see companies like Kmart, KFC and McDonald's churn their young workers because they're cheaper if they keep them younger. These kinds of practices have been embedded by the major political parties, just as they've embedded casualisation over 30 or 40 years and done nothing about it. Just as they've curtailed the right to strike, which would otherwise give workers the power to emancipate themselves and their class. Just as they've done so little on climate change, the biggest issue facing young workers and our world at the moment. Independent good unions are the critical mechanism for workers to change their world. It's the way it's been for a couple of 100 years. It's the way it still is today. And it's so essential. Without direct action of members in unions, we see the disasters around the world. So I've had the fortune to been to Bangladesh in 2014 twice. And in that country in 2013, just over 9 years ago, a Rana Plaza was a factory where many thousands of workers worked, where in an industry where 97% of workers are not in unions. And in that factory, over 1,130 workers were murdered just over 9 years ago. This is what happens when workers are prohibited, stopped, or forced not to be able to build fair democratic unions. It's essential that we allow that. It's essential that you get involved. If you're listening today and you're in a union, find out how you can get more involved in it. These are the things that we do to improve your workplace, but it only happens by workers working together. It's not so much a matter of saying, well, what benefits can I get from being in a union? There are many benefits in almost every sector from being in a union. The reality is it's what you put in is what you get out. The same as being a member of YCW or many other member-based organisations. By being a member of a union and being active in your union, you're joining a movement that for hundreds of years has been on the side of securing things like the weekend and fair wages and better conditions and safety at work. These are the things that unions have been securing now for a very long time. And it's a great thing to be part of, but you'll get out of it what you put into it. So thanks for having me. Happy to answer questions, as I said, same as Wallace at the end. Thank you.
Oh, Josh, thank you very, very much for sharing about the obvious importance of unions and how they assist you in securing the rights and the history behind it and what they've been doing for many, many years. So thank you for that. We will, again, take questions at the end. So we'll move on to our third speaker, who is John Dilip. So John is the previous administration assistant to the at Young Christian Workers. He's currently working as an IT analysis for Accenture. He also holds a postgraduate in IT and is a strong advocate for migrant and refugees, as well as international student workers' rights. He'll be speaking about his experience as a worker. So John, without further ado.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy.
Sorry, John, we're just having a bit of trouble hearing you. I'm not sure if it's just me.
Hello, everyone. So my name is
Might be having a bit of difficulty with John coming through, so just bear with us a moment.
Yeah, so thank you for that introduction, Kathy. I just moved a little bit closer to my internet. Now it's working. Yeah, so I came to Australia as an international student, working here and studying here for my postgraduate, working many precarious jobs, one in hotels as well as a delivery driver, and just then coming into YCW as an administrative assistant. In the first slide, you can see Wallace showing all the different types of employment I would have been in all, now securing my full-time position. The key thing that I would have noticed in all those forms of work is, especially for international students and migrants, they don't have much visibility in terms of workers' rights. Like when I was working in the hotel, I used to get pulled into additional hours and like without any pay, and made to do additional tasks that were not befitting my profile. So that is when that is when it's happening. And so basically, like working there and then into precarious jobs like delivery, driving, and COVID hit, and we all lost our jobs. And without, because I think we were a casual worker, we didn't have much security, like Wallace mentioned. And when COVID hit, we just replaced without giving any warning or formal indication that our jobs are lost. And it was a very tough time because we didn't have any support, and we relied on our jobs for education, rent. And when we were let go, it was a very hard, very hard time for us. So coming to YCW, and then being offered a part-time role there, I kind of learned a lot of information in these areas, and I became a stronger advocate for migrant workers and their rights. And I'm keen to also take this forward and, like, help out wherever necessary in my future for future migrants coming in, providing them with the right resources and directing them always towards YCW so that they can learn more about their rights and proceed further. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for sharing your story with us. I do love how you've taken your own experiences and are now putting them to good use, and like you said, directing people to the YCW if they have any wage dispute or work disputes, and helping people as much as you can. Thank you so much. Alrighty. We'll take, like I mentioned again, we'll take all questions at the end. So we'll move on to our fourth and final speaker, Stephen Kelly. Now, Stephen Kelly worked for the YCW in the 1990s, including as National Secretary, and has since worked for the Finance Sector Union, as well as an investigator for the Fair Work Ombudsman. He is currently working for government in industrial relations policy, as well as teaching on this subject at the University of Technology in Sydney. He'll be discussing exploitation at work and wage theft and what to do in such a situation. So, Stephen, without further ado, please take it away.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. So what I'll do is just attempt to share the screen of some slides that I have for the presentation. So let me just confirm that you can see my slideshow. Is that correct?
Yes, it's there.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I have something in the middle, which I'll get rid of. Okay, so the subject which I wish to address tonight is the issue of wage theft. And so let's look at how we can define wage theft, or what is wage theft. And this list that you have in front of you is not exhaustive. There are many other forms of wage theft that can take place. And we've heard already some examples of where Josh has been speaking. For example, the case of where the employees in his situation were told to clock off and then continue to be working unpaid. There are too many cases of big and small companies, and perhaps the more shocking cases are the larger companies, cases such as Coles, Woolworths, National Australia Bank, Commonwealth Bank, McDonald's, even the ABC. The list goes on. So one case which you may have heard of is the case of McDonald's, where, and this is quite common in a range of different companies, where there's penny pinching to the point where people are rostered only to the time where they would take a break. So they then are working the period under the contract or the instrument, the award, whereby they wouldn't then be entitled to a break. So that's the extent that some employers go to thieve wages. So you can see there, superannuation is a very common case where in some companies superannuation isn't paid, breaks, overtime, unpaid work itself, misclassification, non-payment of loadings and penalties. So they may be situations which you have experience of, and we've heard of that situation just listening to John as well. So very simply, why is there wage theft? And maybe the simple answer is because employers can thieve wages. They are able to do it, and they do that. It's to an extent that it's seen by many employers as the cost of doing business. Now, in some, just very simply, if you're an employer and you are paying the correct rates of pay and giving people their full entitlements, then you're, in comparison to a competitor down the road who isn't, well, your competitor is actually undercutting you. Okay, so you are paying correctly as the employer, and yet an employer that's you're competing with isn't. So therefore, of course, you're losing profits against your competitors, and your competitors may then seek to undercut you in terms of prices and costs and so forth. So we've got, if you like, a normalization of this kind of practice, which is endemic through, again, not just small companies, but larger companies that's embedded. And so you do have cases where in these large companies, it's very clear when a large company such as Commonwealth Bank with large human resource departments and so forth, it's a very deliberate and systematic approach which is embedded and built into their business model. And that often is on the back of particularly some employees that want to, that have aspirations and want to move through a career path. And of course, it's the accepted culture and practice in that workplace, and to then stand against that can mean that it's at your own individual disadvantage. So in terms of the solutions, and I'm going to talk in very general terms, and we can maybe be more specific in the time for questions. But in simple terms, what we have is in terms of, well, again, to explain wage theft, and it might be useful for me to explain an example of wage theft that I was involved with, whereby when I was working for the Fair Work Ombudsman, it was about a group of workers that weren't paid correctly for collecting trolleys. So people would know in terms of the supermarket trolleys that are left in car parks and so forth. And in that example, what we had is one of the large supermarket companies contracting out that job or that function of trolley collection to another company to provide employees for them. Now that company then contracted out to a second company, and then that company contracted out to a third company. So you get this situation in some situations of contracting out to the point where those trolley collectors, in my example, didn't even know who their boss was. And in some cases, in small companies, there are situations where employers will systematically and deliberately conceal their identity by perhaps just providing their first name and a mobile number, and thereby when there is a complaint made, the employees don't even know who they're actually working for. Okay, so it does get very murky and messy in some cases. In other cases, it's very clear. But again, it's hard to be it's hard to be specific when I'm just presenting an overall picture here. So in terms of the solutions, the first, as we've heard from Josh and from Wallace, is that there's the importance of coming together as a collective, and that is by joining a trade union as soon as you start your job. Okay, so unions, of course, would be there to provide you with information and backup, all right? Because as an individual, generally speaking, you have less power than as a collective. In terms of trade unions, again, the effectiveness of a trade union depends on the numbers in that trade union. So again, it's better even if you are one individual and there are no other members, but of course it's better to have more members because the power of the union is increased and the employer will take more notice of that union when there are more members in that workplace. In terms of some of the other solutions, of course, is that there's in legislation, in the law, there's deliberate policies and procedures that actually restrict union activity. And so that again is a matter of politicians who should be changing the law to make it easier for unions to do their job, because it is rather difficult. And one of the issues would be, of course, is access to records. So that's something that the peak body of the union movement, the ACTU, has been calling for. So just to move on. Now, in terms of kind of help, I might actually go to maybe this point first and come back to that. As I've said, in many situations, there'll be a deliberate strategy, particularly in smaller companies, where an employer will go out of their way not to be known by the employees. So very simply put, it's all about information. And about maybe one other example to give you is that in the YCW just a couple of years ago, there are a group of it was 12 employees that were hired to clean a construction site just prior to the selling of the units, the flats that were built. Now, those workers worked for 14 days, and at that end of the time, they weren't paid for the time that they worked. Now, when we were assisting or trying to help that group, the basic question of where did you work? Who was your employer? What records do you have? What proof do you have? The difficulty was that they only had a name and a mobile number. And so the job was to find out where they worked for and who they worked for, and so who they worked for. So in that case, it's quite difficult, but we found that at the head of the chain, remember I spoke to you about the contracting out of work. So we went to the head. Okay, now the head of the chain of the contracting out has no actual legal obligation to pay what the other company that legally contracted out or was the employer, because that other company that they worked for was responsible. So it was quite difficult and if not impossible. And so this is where, again, you can use different strategies and tactics. Sometimes there is the law, and then sometimes there are strategies and tactics such as shaming and using the brand name of companies to actually use that as leverage and as a power to essentially put pressure on the other companies, the smaller companies that have been contracted out. And perhaps that video that Josh showed is an example of trying to impact and use publicity to put pressure on an employer, such as the books shop in Newtown, by the way, which I go to, which is very interesting to learn about. But anyway, lots of left-wing books in that bookshop, but obviously not being put in practice. Okay, so let's go to what is the solution. The evidence. Pay slips, payment summaries, bank statements, diary entries of work performed, timesheets, rostering, job descriptions, photos, job ads, written contracts. Now, let's go to the worst case scenario where people are working cash in hand and they obviously don't have much power in terms of pushing the issue. Simply put, what you need to be doing is actually taking photos, being creative, such as in that organisation, if there's a certificate of business on the wall, taking photos of that, names. Now, in other cases I've worked on in the Fair Work Ombudsman, it could be that you keep records in a diary of when you worked exactly, the shift start time and finish time. Again, maybe photos, evidence, and then also to the extent, in one case I was working on where the employee, or rather it's another issue, sham contracting, which we can't go into, where the supposed, or the actual, should have been the employee, kept records of the pay, sorry, the car park tickets that were used. You know, when you pay for a car park, you get a ticket to put on your car window. So those kind of creative ways of trying to get this evidence when you're working in smaller, dodgy companies is really important. So let's just go back now. I'm jumping around. In terms of how to recover lost wages, what you can do is, number one, as I've said, if you are a member of the union and the union is effective and does take action, and you have that collective strength behind you, you can take action practically when you're in the job, and to recover wages, or to act to stop the practice. For example, people not being paid breaks, or other issues or penalties that aren't being paid. But you can also, if you do then leave the company, take action after you've left the company. But that then depends on what I've just mentioned, which is evidence. What proof do you have that you actually worked and should have been paid in the place that you say you did? You need evidence. Now, in the first instance, join a union. In the second instance, put a complaint into the Fair Work Ombudsman. But there are also, in different jurisdictions, different states, different options where, if you do have evidence, you can go into what's called a small claims duration, where you don't need a lawyer, but you do need some legal support in terms of presenting evidence. So that means to say that you can store up and keep the evidence for after you do leave the employer, up to a period of, let's say, I think it's 6 years or 7 years. It's a statute of limitation. So, so keep your evidence, but it's often where people don't have evidence that really we can't do much at all, because we don't have proof that people actually worked where they worked. But again, keep those evidence. So that's the evidence there I have, and I'm nearly here. Now, in terms of one of the steps to take, it's called what's called a letter of demand. And this here is a copy and paste of what's on the Fair Work Ombudsman. There's lots of detail there, but for you to then, with support of either the YCW or some other person, if you're not in a union, is to go to the employer with the evidence inserted into the letter of demand and put that letter to the employer. And again, this in a perfect world, you'd have records. Because we don't live in a perfect world and there is cash in hand jobs, just because you don't work being paid, just because you're receiving cash in hand doesn't mean you can't try to recover the wages that should have been paid to you, because it's the responsibility of both the employee and the employer to basically pay tax. So don't let that put you off. It just complicates the situation. Let's just see. So I've got some references here, and I've actually relied heavily on the ACTU, which is the peak body for trade unions, which is attempting to change the law and make it easier to recover stolen wages, and particularly to hold employers to account. And so that's what I'd like to leave you with. But congratulations to Josh while I got the floor for him and his colleagues in terms of pushing other unions to be more accountable. So there you go. I can stop share and stop talking.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing all of that very important information. Of course, you discussed the important and unfortunately common problem around wage theft and other work issues. It was interesting to hear about the multifaceted origins of wage theft and why it happens, and then hearing the solutions that you provided on how to tackle wage theft, which I'm sure will be used with a lot of gratitude by the people who are viewing this this conference, if they are unfortunate to find themselves in that experience. Now, so the panel is now open for questions. Before we go into that, let me just check. We might see if we can watch that video that can be shared. So bear with us a moment. If we can, then we'll watch it. It's only 2 minutes long. If not, we'll go straight into questions. Alrighty, just bear with us a moment. Alrighty, can everybody see that? Yes, okay, perfect. Can everyone hear? No? Okay.
You need to share sound as part of the sharing screen.
Alrighty.
There's a button on the share screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicole.
Sweetie, we are flat chat. I'm going to need you to stay longer tonight. Don't worry, I'll pay you cash for the extra hours. And thank you. You're the best.
Where's Joy?
She's probably stuck at work again.
On the other hand, I passed my exam.
Yay! Congrats! Happy New Year! Happy New Year!
Order up table 5. I need those glasses. And can someone please take a coffee order?
Job promotion, travel, losing weight. No, self-love. Yeah.
Trouble, it will find you. It's behind
Order up table 5. Are we having fun yet, guys?
Why did I give it to person?
Unfold from my mind.
Oh, hey, hun. Thank you so much for tonight. Could not have done it without you. See you tomorrow. But I...
You fall in for someone new. A feathered heart forgets everything that's true. Feels like I've ran into 1,000 shades of blue. I'm holding on to somebody like you.
Get help now. Call 1-800.
Just unmute yourself, Kathy.
Thank you, Stephen. I think Josh also wanted to share his video, if that's working now, so we'll give that a go as well.
Do you want me to do that, Kathy?
Yes, so if you just share screen and then I think Nicole said you have to press share sound as well.
Couldn't find the share screen button there for a sec.
You
So
have to click share sound when you hit share screen as well.
is that a separate button, is it?
Yeah, it's in the like pop-up screen. There's like a little tick box. It's very hidden.
In the bottom left corner.
Ah, learn something new every day. Hear that?
For all of this year, basically, we've been trying to get an EBA, an enterprise bargaining agreement for fair pay and basic rights for our workers.
It's no gift after all, but for this the struggle must continue.
I'm here to stand in solidarity with the workers at Better Red Than Dead. The management are fucking around.
G'day everyone, we're going to head over to King Street now, so come and join us.
I live in this neighbourhood and I've been going to Better Red Than Dead for years, and I'm basically here to support the workers in their fight.
The resistance will survive with the definition.
Our members are inside implementing their industrial action as we speak. And 2 months ago, we thought this dispute was over, but through the employer's lawyers, they are no longer holding to their agreed position. So this week, members voted unanimously to re-implement their bans.
What is exceptional about today is that there's a group of people who are prepared to actually, together, take some kind of action and refuse to be treated like second-class citizens.
My name's Emma and I've worked at Better Red Than Dead for 3.5 years. We've been fighting to get an enterprise bargaining agreement and we thought we were there. I'm so proud to be part of this group of workers. They've stood strong throughout this campaign, standing up for one another, growing our collective power together.
I really want to send a message to the bosses. They cannot abuse and be dishonest towards their workers.
After months of Better Red Than Dead refusing to meet and negotiate with us workers, threatening myself and others with redundancies, sacking our comrade, Luca, industrial action was our only option. All of us were asked by Better Ed if we were participating in industrial action, and every single one of us said yes. Better Ed's response was to lock out workers, but within days, they finally wanted to negotiate seriously with us. There is power in solidarity and power in withholding your labour.
When I say union, you say power. Union! Power! Union! Power!
Now, 15 weeks later, Better Ed Than Dead has walked back on claims they agreed to, including parental leave, Sunday penalty rates and junior rates. We have always been willing to negotiate, but this is completely outrageous and we will not be conceding on these fronts. So we're going to be taking industrial action again and we're not going to stop until we get that agreement.
I used to work at Better Red before I got fired about 6 months ago in what was essentially an attack against the union. I'm back here today because I want to support all my friends at Better Red. It's a really tight-knit bunch of people who are really committed to each other and just want the best workplace they can for each other.
These workers are doing what no other workers in retail have done in the last 50 years, which is take industrial action.
Employees have gotten away for too long with bad wages, bad conditions.
It's really cool to see this crowd and all the solidarity.
I think that union strength is like, you know, it's the way in which we can change society.
Our members continue their industrial action and they're not going to stop until the agreement that was agreed in July is signed. Dare to struggle, dare to win.
And I think just sort of, I mean, it's a really powerful video, but the difference between the two videos, you know, where a young worker is alone and doesn't have the support and the solidarity of co-workers compared to this fantastic group of young people that have just been absolutely kicking ass.
Yeah, definitely, Josh. It's very well said. But you can clearly see the difference that the impact is at the end of one video where she looks quite hopeless and that she won't challenge it versus the power that they have in numbers by coming together as a union. Alrighty, well, with the videos completed, that brings us to the Q&A section of the conference. So feel free to type your questions into the chat, whether that's Facebook Live or Zoom, and we will get to as many as we can in the time that we have. We actually already have a few questions that I've gathered throughout the conference, so we'll start with those. So the first question is, at the end of the job with the accrued annual leave, does the employer need to pay those accrued hours at normal rate or at that penalty rate, which I think was 17.5%? So anyone can jump in, but I think this might be directed towards Wallace.
Yeah, so generally speaking, if the award or the employment contract specifies that the needs to be paid with the 17.5% extra, then that will apply. So now a very large number of jobs will have that because a very large number of jobs are covered by the award. And of course, many jobs on top of that will have a written employment contract, which also has a term that says you've got to pay with the 17.5% extra. So in particular, if you're covered by an award, most awards say that your annual leave should be paid out upon the conclusion of employment with the 17.5% annual leave loading. That said, it is possible to have a job where that doesn't apply. That's why it's important to check the award and check your employment contract to check whether that is applicable to you.
Just in retail, there will be many workplaces, all of the majors and the award itself, where if you get more in your penalty rates than you would of the 17.5%, then you get the higher. You don't get both, but you get the, so a young worker or a worker that works only on weekends and they've got the benefit of penalty rates on weekends or on weeknights, then they, but at the weekends, if that's when they work, they'll often be better off with those penalty rates and they will be paid those if they're higher than the 17.5. But it does vary between awards. It varies if you've got a salary or you're paid wages. So it really does need some advice if it's not as straightforward when you look at your award.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Josh and Wallace, for answering that question. We'll move on to the next one. So the next question is actually directed towards Josh. It says, many temporary visa holder workers in retail and the fast food sector have big information gap on being a member of a union and the benefits are involved. How do you think that we can bridge this gap?
Yeah, there's some fantastic work done by unions like the United Workers Union, the old NUW. They travel overseas to talk to workers before they even come to Australia on visas. In retail and fast food, it is very difficult to reach many workers and to talk about some of these issues, partly because the exploitation is real. So what happened in 7-Eleven, the workers didn't want to pay back part of their wage. They were given no choice. Happens in lots of sectors. I remember at the CFMEU where Chinese workers at a paper maker that made toilet tissue were kept in an ADCO hut and they had to pay most of their wages on site in rent so that they could live in this ADCO hut. So there's lots of groups of workers that don't get that. I think that there's a range of ways. The most obvious for those that are international students is through international student unions on campus. So student clubs, international student clubs, but also the student unions on campus are one way of providing information. But there should be a mandate, just like there's a Fair Work information statement now required to be handed to employees and information about casual work rights handed to employees or given to employees. There should be fundamental information that explains in no uncertain terms the rights for workers to join unions and participate in unions. And we also do need to see more unions expanding their capacity on this front. Some unions are fantastic with lots of material in different languages. In Victoria, we're sort of blessed with the Migrant Workers Centre. We don't have that in many other states. And so these types of resources are one way of starting to bridge that gap. But there's a lot of work to be done. There's no doubt about it.
Awesome. And just I think a follow-up to that question, another part was how can I convince my friends, mostly casual workers in their 20s, to join a union?
Well, that's partly why that video and more videos like it are being produced by RAFWU, and more stories are being told by RAFWU, but also again by the NUW and the United Workers Union, who have a heavily casualised workforce, to share stories of success, because they are few and far between. I started in YCW, my casual work action, 30 years ago, and I had many experiences of being sacked for engaging in it. We still do have members. We're in the courts at the moment with a couple of cases where members were sacked as casual workers for trying to organise their workplaces. So this is a huge issue, and it comes back in our approach to the things I learned at YCW, and that's about building community. If you can build community around workers, then you can build a real sense that they'll be supported even in the darkest times. And that can be as basic as providing meals, as helping with rent and things like that, which are the real concerns for many casual workers who face these sorts of issues. So for that group at Better Red Than Dead, almost all of them casual. I think 20-something workers in the workplace, 3 non-casual. They've stood together, they've supported each other right through that process. And building that community is essential. If you've got a good union in your space, then you'll hopefully be able to reach out to a good organiser who'll help you build that community and help you have those conversations with your co-workers about what can be achieved when you stand together. But all the more reason why these types of videos, and I think back 20 years ago to the Smart Casual campaign in YCW, those campaigns were essential to help build a spirit and a community around casual workers and those in less secure work.
Perfect, thank you, Josh. We'll move on to the next question, which was directed to John. What gap have you experienced with regards to getting information on workers' rights issues for temporary visa holders? Who is responsible, and why don't people report? Sorry, John, were you able to hear that question? That was directed towards you. We may still be having some technical difficulties on John's end, so we might just move over to the next question, unless somebody else would like to.
I think Wallace seems fair.
Yeah. Look, I can talk about that. Yeah, I see a lot of these. There are a range of factors, and no one factor is everything. So in terms of some barriers to why temporary visas, I think that's the question. Visa holders don't report issues in the workplace. So one is the structure of the visa system themselves. So a lot of people are on visas, which means that there's like a kind of relationship between themselves and the employer, such as a sponsored skilled visa, where if they lose that job and they don't find a new job within a very short period of time, then they don't have a valid visa to stay in the country. So that makes it very, very difficult to speak out against your employer. So I'm thinking about temporary skilled visas like 482 or 457, very famous. Other reasons include things like technically breaching visa conditions because the employer, directed you to do something that was in breach of the visa conditions. For example, outside the pandemic, international students had a 40-hour per fortnight limit on work hours. That often creates a lot of issues because you're often told to, and you're going to follow it because that's your job, to work more than 40 hours in a fortnight. And now you become worried about, again, speaking against your employer, because your employer says, well, we're all in the same boat here. You worked over 40 hours a fortnight. That's a breach of your visa conditions. So there's that factor. But of course, on top of that, and for many people, there are some, language and cultural barriers as well. Often there are many who perhaps don't yet understand some of the rules in Australia. And that's, other issues that the Migrant Workers Centre seeks to address for its educational programs as well. So without making this, I could go on about this all day, but those are some of the factors which make it very, very difficult.
Kathy, Can I just jump in
Yes.
on that point? You look, I don't think there's one so the issue is if this is the from Nicole as well, this question around what could be done when there are exploited workers that are on visas with restrictions, and that through their employment they're actually in breach, or they're breaking the rules of their visa, so they're vulnerable in terms of their stay in this country at risk and being at risk of deportation. I really don't have a simple black and white answer, because there isn't one, but obviously that person is vulnerable. I just think it's a case-by-case situation. Of course, the employer is also in breach of their obligations as well, and so maybe the best response is that there can be some delicate pressure being put onto the employer, in not in a legal sense, but some kind of pressure that perhaps through workers acting collectively, that there's some kind of pressure for the employer to deliver. And in some of these cases, it may be not even recovering the full amount that you're entitled to, but part of the amount. And that if that's obviously part of the amount that you're owed is better than nothing at all. However, so that issue is about just putting pressure in a delicate way. And I mean, people may be familiar of the 7-Eleven case going back some years ago, where under the student visa rules, students on that visa are only allowed to work 20 hours per week. And in that 7-Eleven case, one of their ways of thieving wages was is for people to be paid on the books at 20 hours for the full amount, but to work up to 40 or more than 40 hours. So that's the kind of deception that we're dealing with. But yeah, case-by-case situation, I think. I don't have any other magic answers, unfortunately.
Thank you all for your answers. Well, we'll move on to the next question because we don't have too much time left. And that question was, in the panel's opinion, how would you approach a situation as the employee where your manager has limited or incorrect knowledge of workplace entitlements and workplace policies around overtime, and this affects employees in detrimental ways? My colleagues and I have raised this with our senior managers, HR, and the union, but little action has been taken. And that question was directed towards anybody.
I mean, they've tried everything, haven't they? I mean, this comes up fairly often, actually, maybe not specifically around overtime, but misrepresentation. Like today, there's been 2 people contact me about managers telling them that they have to give 2 hours notice for sick leave. This is despite us running and winning a federal court case against a Macca's franchise on that issue. So these sorts of issues are pervasive. They're pervasive amongst bad management who either don't care or use these techniques to secure a benefit. You know, wage theft occurs because it can occur. You know, very often there's a profit to be made by someone. In this kind of scenario, what I generally will advise is to get it in writing, because lots of managers will back down once they have to put something in writing. So a simple request saying, can you please put that request in writing, or that direction in writing, or that representation? Can you just put that in writing to me, and can you get it to me in writing soon? If you're in secure employment, that can be a really effective way to get them to go and actually think twice or get some better advice. Not to avoid doubt though, I mean, HR is not on anyone's side. HR are employed by management to represent the interests of management. I've got the benefit of a master's in HR. That what I learned was not how to effectively support workers in the workplace. That's not the role of HR. The role of good unions will be to represent workers in the workplace. HR as a discipline was created to counter unions. That's its purpose. So I don't think anyone should be under any illusions with that. But asking for things in writing is one effective way of trying to get a better outcome. And then if you're a union member and you've raised it in the union, you're entitled to a better response. You escalate it. It's a member-based organisation, right? So you just ask for someone else to look at it, or you contact the secretary or president or someone else, especially if you're a worker from a disadvantaged group. If you're a young worker, or you're a woman, or you're a worker of colour, all the more reason that you need to have your voice heard. So just escalate it and ask for someone to have a second look at it, or to provide that extra bit of help. Unions expect that. That's not going out of, there's nothing wrong with asking for that extra bit of support if you've given a fair time for the union official, the person responsible to deal with it.
I was still on mute. Thank you, Josh. We'll go on to the next question. It says, what was it? If someone has a contract that says flexible hours over a 7-day period, should they get paid overtime or penalty rates for the weekend?
Yeah, sorry, I have to employ the two most hated words from lawyers, and that would be it depends. Unfortunately, I would really have to look at what the contract says and some of the other terms to really be able to say. I would just have to note that many contracts, well, flexible is a meaningless word, but many contracts offer a salary package that's meant to cover a bunch of entitlements. And sometimes they have a couple of words in there which says it sets off entitlements to overtime or penalty rates. Now, in many situations, that can be lawful as long as the total annual salary package they're offering is still more than what you would have gotten if you added up all of your entitlements under the award. So many of the issues start popping up when, here's this great little package, but you work so much overtime that your total that you would have gotten under the award starts to exceed the annual salary package. That's when alarm bells start to ring. So sorry, I don't have a kind of definitive answer on that. It will depend on reading the contract, and it will also depend a lot on the size of that salary package relative to award entitlements.
It's one of the reasons why completing maths at high school is a really good idea. Woolworths is now at $500 million in owed wages just to salaried managers. It's not to the vast majority of wages workers, just to salaried managers, because of this issue that the wages, the salaries they were paying them wasn't enough to cover the overnight hours, the weekend hours, and the overtime that they were working. So it really does depend on the math, on what you've signed in your contract, and what your basic award or agreement rights are, and all of that will generally require someone to help you look at. But we see this all the time in retail. Many stores, in shopping centres and elsewhere, you'll have a store manager and an assistant store manager. They'll be the full-time salaried staff. Everyone else will be casual. They're not the store manager and assistant store manager because it's a grandiose title. They're being paid a salary which will be right on the line and usually under. So doing the maths, doing what Stephen said in terms of keeping all of that evidential record, and then what Wallace has spoken about earlier as well, about what the entitlements are and what they mean, all of that coming together is what might find an underpayment.
Alrighty, thank you very much. I'll move on to the next question, and it might just be our last. How challenging, it's a very interesting question actually, how challenging is it to prove mental health as a workplace injury? With the superannuation and permanent disability claim, I heard that if you get into mental health plan and change the superannuation fund, they might deny a permanent disability claim due to mental health and cite it as a pre-existing condition. Is this correct?
In Australia, it's one of the few areas where workers can get free advice. Almost any personal injury law firm will provide advice, at least in an early stage, to workers on workplace injuries and other forms of personal injury. You want to go to a reputable firm. We use Shine, but lots of others, Morris Blackburn, Slater & Gordon, Gordon Legal. There's lots of various firms right around the country and different in different states, because there's different laws in each state, where you'll be able to at least call the law firm and they will have a first discussion with you for free about workplace injuries and what your rights might be. I am not a workplace lawyer, an personal injury lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't answer that more generally, but those firms will provide advice about superannuation rights and about personal injury, generally at the very first stage, for free.
Yeah, I might just add to that too. And I will also hazard that I'm not a personal injury lawyer, so it's not my area of expertise. But we do have a lot of workers come through who have these sorts of claims, and they are very important claims to pursue. So firstly, absolutely, Josh is 100% correct that, like, yes, lots of law firms will provide this advice, and that's very important. There's also another service available, particularly to union members, but also we are able to make regular referrals to them as well. And this is in Victoria, by the way, and this is it's a service called Union Assist, and Union Assist basically is a project of many different unions, and also funded by the government in Victoria as well. And that provides basically free assistance with disputes to do with work cover. So, if you have like a mental health claim and it's rejected, or it's watered down, then, there is, beyond advice, there is assistance with the dispute itself from Union Assist that's available to be in Victoria. And I know some other states have some equivalents for that. I can also make a general comment about mental health claims. I know often there's a bit of reputation that they are a bit hard, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be pursued. Absolutely, everyone should, if they believe that a mental health injury has occurred in the workplace, go ahead and do that. Well, especially if you have advice, of course. So it should not be a barrier. And there are many ways, as we've discussed, in order to assist in making sure that claim gets up. And also, I don't know, I think there is some parts of the audience that are in Victoria, so unfortunately I can't extrapolate this to other states because workplace injury is a state-by-state matter. But in Victoria, when you make a mental health claim, even before it is accepted, there are already some benefits available to you, including some, I think it's a treatment that is already paid for, even before the claim is accepted. And that's to recognise the, serious issues with mental health in the workplace that exist. So I'm not totally sure what the situation is in other states, but in Victoria, that is certainly a thing that people can access.
I think I can read the question as well. I'm not sure if it's actually directed at super rather than work cover. If it's directed at super, right, it's effectively an insurance claim. Now, the law firms will help with that as well, but it's a bit of a different thing to what most unions will deal with in their sort of day-to-day work. So if it's an insurance claim through the superannuation fund, again, most of these law firms will provide that bit of advice. But yeah, I think what Wallace has described is spot on in terms of the rights in Victoria, and it's very different in each state, so all the more important to get different advice in different states.
Alrighty, thank you, Josh and Wallace, for answering that question. We have gone a little bit over time, so this will be our final question, and that is in regards to split shifts in a day. How does it work? Especially regarding overtime in the aged care industry, and I think this says workers being care workers and kitchen staff.
I'm just going to jump in because it's going to be different depending on the enterprise agreement or the award that applies to them. So, for example, in retail and fast food, split shifts were allowed until RAFWU came along, and they've basically been abolished right through retail and fast food now, which is a split shift is, for those that don't know, it's basically where you work 2 periods of work in the one day. And my daughter does that at a hotel, where in the hospitality award or in the clubs award, they're allowed to have split shifts. You work a lunch shift and you work an dinner shift. But in retail, it's basically been abolished. It was a way of basically keeping people on the hook for long meal breaks or some other thing. So it does, but it entirely depends on the enterprise agreement or the award that applies and whether they're allowed or permissible. Generally, we would say at RAFWO that a second period should be paid as overtime and otherwise be one continuous period through the day. Before I leave the chair though, I'm just going to quickly say that there was a question about the election. There is no doubt there is a clear choice for workers about what at this election, and that the incumbent government is not the friend of workers, of refugees, or of anyone. And in terms of the visa issue, that is a clear issue where changing the government is the best chance for workers on visas to have a better future in terms of not being so precarious in their employment, and finally getting some changes in place which protect workers on visas in circumstances where they are being exploited at work. So that is one area where I would say a change of government is essential, and there are millions of others.
Kathy, do you mind if I just jump in after that? Okay, so one of the issues that has been that the ACTU, the peak union body, have been trying to pursue is this issue about casual conversion. And this is where, as a casual, you should have the right to be able to choose to become a permanent employee. So over the last years, the union movement has been campaigning for this. However, in instruments in awards, many awards have what's called casual conversion, which is a very weak and ineffective situation where you can request to your employer, and your employer can refuse that request for you to become permanent and give certain evidence about the reasons why that's not possible for that employer. So it's very weak and ineffective. So what the ACTU has been pushing for is casual conversion, and I believe it's after a period where, as a casual, you'd be working systematic or consistent shifts for 6 months in the same workplace, and whereby at that 6-month point, you would automatically be converted to become a permanent employee. And so you then, as that person, that employee, then could also have the option to revert back to becoming a casual employee. But the point to make here is that it's an automatic process, and it's an opt-out process. So that is really crucial, that you don't have, as a casual, you don't have to request that. It's an automatic process where you're converted to become a permanent. Once that happens, you then get a choice to opt out and then revert, and then go back to becoming a casual. And of course, excuse me, it's really crucial to make the point about what we've been talking about tonight, which is about power, and particularly the vulnerability of workers. And so in that case, it's if casual conversion, it gives the casual, in that case, more power, because the process is automatic, but they get a choice. Now, is that the simple silver bullet answer? No, but it's a step, because of course the employer might manipulate that situation. And once again, we come back to collective power, which is why people should be joining as a group together as a union to back you as an individual up in that situation. So that's the point about casual conversion. And of course, I know that's part of the Greens policy, and I believe it's part of the ALP policy, but I'm not completely, let's say, satisfied and secure. So that's why I would say we need a strong balance of power or party in the Senate, such as the Greens, to actually make sure that they use that bargaining power to put pressure even on the ALP, the Labor Party, who should be doing the right thing, that often and more or less don't. So anyway, that's my kind of opinion and contribution.
Yeah, I don't propose to comment on any of that, but I do just want to note there were some kind of industrial questions I've just answered in the chat if people were looking for those answers. And of course, in relation to the aged care question, of course, that will depend on the award, as Josh said. So any questions like that or any further questions, I think the YCW definitely have our contact details, and I'm really happy to field any further detailed questions about particular situations, and hopefully I'll have the benefit of looking at the particular situation and particular award and can provide some information on those. But yeah, just wanted to put that in there as well.
Yes, thank you, Wallace, for answering the additional questions that we didn't have time to get to tonight. In regards to contact details, we're actually going to ask you if you are open to being contacted by the people who've been watching this stream conference. If you could just please put your contact details into the chat. Also, if you would like to put links to your presentations and videos that you put, you can put those in the chat as well. I will be putting the Overworked Underpaid video in the chat. By Youth Law Australia. They've got a lot of other videos and they do help people in regards to work and wage disputes if you want to check them out as well. And also here at the YCW, we do offer as much support as we can to people who are in a work or wage dispute scenario. Now, before we leave, and we'll wait for those contact details to come through for our speakers today, if they're open to sharing. Before we leave, we'll also be taking a photo of everyone who's here. So might just give you guys a moment to put those details in the chat, and then we'll get that photo ready. So for our other people who are joining on Zoom, if you would like to turn your cameras on.
I thought, Kathy, you were going to say that you'd give time for us to put some makeup on and make ourselves look beautiful.
No, you're beautiful just as you are.
Sure, thank you.
Just a quick plug before we take the photo. Workers in Sydney have an unbelievable opportunity at the moment to see so many different forms of direct action right across the economy, right across the different workplaces. Tomorrow, I know the NTU at the University of Sydney is conducting action from 7 AM to 1 PM. And so workers in Sydney might want to, if they want to go down and see people taking industrial action on a picket line and visit them and support them in that, University of Sydney tomorrow, I'm sure they'd love to see some people down there saying g'day.
Thanks, Josh.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for that, Josh. Alrighty. So if, before we end the stream, if anybody wants to take a screenshot of the chat in the Zoom so that they've got those details there. Otherwise, we'll give, I think, Melbourne a second to set up the photo. Are you guys ready? Okay, and Ashish, you'll be taking the screenshot. Okay, perfect. Thank you guys so much for joining us for today's Young Workers Conference. We've been so happy to have you. We hope that you learned a lot from these amazing speakers. I know I certainly did. Things that I'll be using in the future for myself. And yes, thank you so much for joining. With that, I think that we'll end our stream. If anybody wants to stay back to debrief, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, thank you and good night.
Thanks to the organisers. Well done.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, appreciate all the work that went into this. Thanks so much to the organisers. See ya.
Thank you. See ya.